This is 2012. There was always the joke of like, oh, the intern's running social. It wasn't really a joke. That was really what was taking place. You get into these rooms and get into these meetings with big Fortune 100, Fortune 100 brands, and you'd literally have the intern or like first job out of college, first year, and you'd have the CEO in the room at the same time. It was pretty wild, but we just made it up as we went. After a little bit, you start to realize there was two conversations. There was the why Sprinklr conversation or the why social conversation. And at that point, the whole entire world is greenfield, right? It was rewarding in every sense, be it personally, professionally, financially. The company was always great to me, provided me the opportunities to sell to the biggest companies in the world, travel the globe, and then certainly to go through a liquidity event like an IPO helped set me up financially. So I felt really fortunate. I remember having lots of colleagues who, they got off the bus early and they were like, oh, I found this opportunity, it sounded really interesting. And then I'd see a bunch of folks, they're on job 2 or job 3 a couple of years later, and they were trying to constantly recreate the special thing we have with the people and the technology and the timing. It's just so hard to recreate. I'm unfailingly loyal. So all of those things made for me sticking around for as long as I did.
It's rare for anyone to spend 10 years at one SaaS company. It's even more rare for someone to go on the journey from first sales hire all the way to an IPO. Today, I'm joined by Jason Fishkind to talk about a decade of sales growth at Sprinklr. Welcome to Grow and Tell, the show where revenue leaders tell the growth stories behind today's successful companies. I'm your host, Alex Krakoff.
Grow and tell, grow and tell.
Jason Fishkind joined Sprinklr as the first AE back in 2012. Social media management was still a new category, and the company had less than $5 million in revenue. He spent 5 years as an AE. He's a top 10 seller in company history before he was promoted to group director of sales. Jason was successful as a leader too. Over the next 5 years, Sprinklr grew to over $500 million in revenue, went through an IPO, and earned a valuation of over $4 billion. After Sprinklr, Jason joined People.ai as a regional VP of sales, where he spent 2 years building out their East Coast team of AEs. Jason recently joined Cresta, a generative AI call center technology, as their AVP of sales. In today's conversation, Jason and I talk about what it was like selling social media in the early days, what made him a successful seller, and how he personally kept up with Sprinklr's growth curve. We also got into what it was like changing companies after 10 years, his favorite interview questions for AEs, and tips for selling AI to the enterprise. I hope you enjoy Jason's growth story. So you sent a cold email that changed your life and led you to join Sprinklr as the first sales hire. Why did you want to join Sprinklr? And do you remember what caught the founder's attention?
Yeah, so it's actually a funny story. So I was in the printing industry for a number of years, and actually I met a girl and I realized she was quite expensive. She had expensive tastes, and I said, you know what? I think I need to earn a bit more money than I had been. So I was in sales. My dad was in sales actually, and he had a whole list of recruiters, and he gave me the list, and he said, "Hey Jason, why don't you call some of these folks?" So I was calling these recruiters, and they all said, "Hey Jason, you don't make enough money for me to qualify for the jobs that you want." I was like, "Oh, okay." So I went back to one guy and I said, "Well, what do you suggest I get myself into so that my next call is to you and I qualify for it?" And he says, "Big data, something, or social." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he goes, "You know what? I like your question. Let me get you an interview with a company called Hearsay Social, which was run by Clara Shih. She's now part of Salesforce, which is a whole story in itself." But he goes, "You know what?" So he goes, tries to get me the interview. I never ended up having the interview. I was doing a bunch of research, came across Sprinklr. I was like, this sounds like a interesting company. And I found I found one or two small articles or videos where they were looked at, and I said, "You know what? Let me cold email the CEO." And there was a simple, short message. It was the subject line was, "Your next top sales athlete. If you're looking for next top sales athlete, your search has ended, ... Put my little background in there. And 3 weeks later, I got an email back, or 2 weeks later, I got an email back. And a few weeks after that, it changed my life. Started. That was it.
And what was Sprinklr like when you joined? Was there like revenue? How big was the team? Was there like a working product? Like how early was it?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a working product. They had been hacking at this thing for a while. Raji bootstrapped the company himself. So they had just taken Series A, $5 million ARR. I think it was $25 million valuation. But I mean, he had bootstrapped it himself. So they were going for a bit. he did all the initial deals himself. So first handful of deals like a Nike or Microsoft or Intel or Cisco. But yeah, it was like it was on 30th Street, Manhattan. The office was disgusting. I had these green and red IKEA desks. It looked like Christmas threw up all over the place. And it's funny because I worked for this Fortune 200 printing company, and the CEO of that company was on my floor in prior life. And I used to wear a suit and tie every day. I mean, my boss at the time would be like, "Did you shave today?" You know? And then I started trying to dress down, but I was walking to this office and everyone in there was it was small little tech company. They were in shorts and a t-shirt, and they didn't like that too much. But yeah, it was interesting for sure.
It's so funny, the difference of like corporate culture versus startup culture. I remember growing up, my dad, who's like corporate lawyer, the whole time would be like, "You're going to have to shave your beard. You're going to have to dress nicely and go to work." And it's like, it's funny being in startup where I can just be a gremlin and wear sweatshirts and as long of a beard I want. It's like a badge of honor, to do that. So it's so funny how different of cultures act. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, it took me a while to like get used to just being okay. I was a ping pong table, whatever, all the typical things, but dressing down was a new one for me.
Yeah. And I'd love to learn more about what early sales looked like at Sprinklr. Because as you said, you're kind of going from seed to Series A. Raji, the founder, was doing all the sales himself. And so what was that transition like from founder-led sales to you starting to do sales? Were you partnering with him on every call? Were you kind of just running your own book of business? Can you take us back to those early days?
Yeah, no. So it was great. I started a handful of their folks started very shortly thereafter, and they had hired a VP of sales that effectively started right around when I did. So Raji was phenomenal. Like working next to him was like getting an MBA by osmosis, just watching. I think I was 27. It was one of those where I wish I had more experience right at the time, just so I really understood what I was soaking in. Hindsight's always 20/20, but. Yeah, he was great. He just said, "Hey, go for it." They weren't really worried about me calling on the existing accounts. It was just go after net new, and go land logos and go figure it out. So it's effective what we did. We tried to figure out what worked, what didn't work, and we did our best.
And social was like this new thing at the time, right? Like what year was that? Because like I assume like social media management wasn't really an existing category. Like what was the state of kind of that market?
Totally. So this is 2012. This is Memorial Day of 2012, around then. And yeah, this is legitimately when there was always the joke of like, "Oh, the intern's running social." It wasn't really a joke. That was really what was taking place. And what was actually fascinating about it was, especially as time went on a little bit, you get into these rooms and get into these meetings with big Fortune 100, Fortune 500 brands, and you'd literally have the intern or first job at a college, first year, and you'd have, because social was so real time in nature, you'd have the CEO in the room at the same time. It was pretty wild, but we just made it up as we went. We were trying to we certainly had some product market fit with the big companies, but we were trying to now bring this to market. There was no brand. No one knew who we were. So we spent a lot of time trying to just get our name out there.
And it seems like you started with definitely, as you said, like bigger companies. I'd love to know, like, what was that early pitch? And was there a lot of education? Like, did you have to teach people about social and then teach them about social media management? Like, how did you sort of convince people that this was a problem that they needed to solve?
Yeah. So I looked at it. It's a good question. I looked at it as binary. Well, at first you start just trying to figure it out, right? Just try out the pitch, try different things. But after a little bit, you start to realize there was two conversations. There was the why Sprinklr conversation or the why social conversation. And at that point, the whole entire world is greenfield, right? Every account doesn't have this. So if I have to go evangelize why social, like why anything, period, probably not a great use of my time. So I really spent my time trying to figure out where are folks doing this, where there's some sophistication and strategy, or there's more than a handful of people that are even thinking about social media within an organization. And that's where I went and spent my time in the why Sprinklr phase,
And what did that early product actually do? Yeah.
So in today's world, it's actually not that fundamentally different from what Sprinklr's core product is, which was just social media management. It was if you put social into three buckets: organic or owned social, earned, and paid. It was all things owned social media. It was before Facebook built the walled garden, right? None of that existed, right? So it was people, we would go explain it. Actually, it was one of those where we'd go to these trade shows, and I used to explain to people, because a lot of what Sprinklr did was it was helping people post things on social media, giving them automation to do that. And there was permissions and calendars and monitoring and reporting. But I would explain to people, it's like the pipes and plumbing for how you operate social media for a big brand. Some understood it, some certainly did it, but we were really competing against, at the time, like Radian 6, which did some listening, which was bought by Salesforce not long after I joined. It was competing against Buddy Media. If you remember, Saplets was a thing, or these things on Facebook, and then Hootsuite. So I would go to these trade shows and people would go, "Oh, so you're like Hootsuite?" And I'm like, "Sort of." Or you're like Buddy Media? Sort of. I'd say, "Oh no, we are Radian 6 plus Buddy Media plus Hootsuite all in one with like reporting and governance." They'd go, "Oh, okay, interesting."
Why do you think it resonated more with like enterprise buyers versus SMB? Like, why did you deliberately go after kind of that more upmarket segment? Was it just like the contract sizes are more appealing and that was kind of the answer? Or did they feel the pain more? Yeah.
I think in Raji's world, he saw this as he was in the email space before, and I think he saw this as an enterprise problem, and that most companies would start with the SMB or start small. And he's like, this social is really complex. Social media is not just one channel like email, it's many channels. It's Facebook and Twitter, and then it's Instagram, and well, now it's Instagram and TikTok and Reddit, and there's dozens, right? And I think he realized the complexity of this, and the real need was going to be for at scale, when these big companies start to really get into this, they're going to need something that's purpose built for the large enterprise. And 1,000% his vision was spot on and accurate. That dude was very much correct.
And you're telling me about how John McMahon was on the board of Sprinklr in the early days, and he's an absolute sales legend. Can you kind of share the story?
Yeah. So McMahon was on the board, or was an advisor to Sprinklr. I forget which one. And I remember we were at this. I had sold print before this, so I'm like 2 months into my software sales career. And we're at this offsite in Westchester, in this like place, this conference center, time forgot. It's like this wood paneled place from the 80s. And there's the entire Sprinklr US based team, the sales team. Basically, there was, I don't know, 25 of us, like everyone that was in the US was there. And McMahon starts training everyone on MedPick. And I remember he's a tall guy, he's imposing, big energy, you know. And I remember him just walking over, stalking, big U-shaped room. I remember him stalking over to me and saying, "Oh, like, what's E?" And I remember saying economic buyer, and he asked me a couple of follow-ups or whatever it was, and I didn't have the answer. And then he came back to me again and he was like, "So what's the answer now?" I remember I just blacked out. Still to this day, that moment gives me like agita, and you know, like, oh God, please never put me back in that scenario again. Though I've definitely had plenty of conversations with him afterwards in the years following, you know.
Yeah, I've never met him myself, but I've listened to him on some YouTube and podcasts and stuff. And there's like a certain level of intensity about that guy where I'm like, oh wow, you must have been really hardcore to work for. And I see why he's like so successful as a sales leader. And he's a bit more chill now. And actually, it's funny. So McMahon was on our board, and then we were pretty early with Force Management with John Kaplan. So actually, the fortune of taking command message from him twice. So being able to, it's like, I don't know, a fun little fact of like, those are two big names in our world and our space, but learning what they do and what they've brought to bear to the market from them directly is a cool little thing to say. And so you spent over 5 years closing new business at Sprinklr, and you were a top 10 AE in company history. Like, what made you so successful as an AE, and why did customers buy from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really two key things. One, it's all about champion building. I realized that early. We used to have a stat at Sprinklr or something along the lines of like more than half the people that led the purchase of Sprinklr were promoted within 12 months. So to me, it's the always identifying a personal win for somebody, whether it's to make their job easier, or it's, hey, they're seeking recognition or their career advancement, or some combination of all the three. Like, building champions is everything. And I think the reason that folks bought from me is I'm always really proud of, I always sold the right deal. Was I always like the top dog on the scoreboard? Probably not, actually. I had a lot of folks, a lot of colleagues who tremendous sales professionals and just absolutely blew their numbers out of the water. But I don't know if they always sold the right deal. What I was really proud of is I think I did, I don't know, 50 or 60 logos in my 5 years, and nearly all of them were still clients when I left, even 5 years after that. So I was never about the short-term win, putting like money in my pocket. It was more about how do I go sell the right deal? How do I go solve the right problem for the customer that they're trying to solve now, prove value, and then in 6, 12, 18 months, they're growing with us and expanding versus trying to resell and save the thing that we oversold.
And who was the champion at Sprinklr? Was it like a social media manager? Was it a VP of marketing? Did it change depending on who you're talking to? Like as you're trying to set meetings with people and find champions at companies, who were you reaching out to?
I mean, in the early days, the title of social, was, did that even exist? Sometimes not. So many times it was a VP of marketing was probably the most common title. And then certainly as time went on, it was a director of social, because most of them didn't have VP titles. And then as organizations became really hip to it and really understanding the power of social, it certainly morphed over time. The other would be, as time went on, it was someone in care. So you'd get into these meetings, and oftentimes you'd remember early days, especially, it would morph social, like the social marketing folks in care. There was the social, one of the first times those two groups were brought together. They need to do something instantaneous. And that's actually a lot of what drove Sprinklr in its early days.
Gotcha. When you say care, it's like people writing on social for customer support requests and things like that. And then you got to figure out, okay, how do I actually follow up with this customer? Because there's a whole new channel you got to manage outside of just like your email support thing. Yeah,
that's exactly it. But marketing owned those channels, right? So marketing owned it. And they're like, oh, I got to solve this. How do I get this? I have to take a screenshot, drop an email, send it to customer support. And then it kind of goes back and they just go ping pong back and forth, as opposed to saying, let me just do this in the system. That's where we would explain a lot of the pipes and plumbing analogies. And that's where it really started to connect for people. And that was really the first key use case that we found huge utility in. I know I wasn't expecting that per se, but it was big.
And how were you able to kind of get on the same side as your champion and not come across as like salesy or trying to sell them something? Like, was it like, how were you able to understand their problems? Were you building roadmaps with them? Like, what were you doing with them that kind of made you such a trusted partner?
I mean, I've been in a leadership role now for a handful of years, and I think it goes to the same thing that I look for in the folks that I recruit. Is the number one trait, I think, is curiosity. So if you're in the room with somebody and you're just trying to throw features and functions at them, I don't think that holds water. But I think if you have some natural curiosity and you ask the right questions to genuinely, and by the way, you show a genuine care for the problem they're seeking to solve, and more importantly, why and with what benefit or outcome, I think that drives a lot of that relationship, and for why some of these folks will go run through a wall to go get things done on behalf of the sales professionals they work with.
And you eventually became a sales leader at Sprinklr. I'd love to know, like, what was the hardest part of that transition from AE to manager?
Yeah. So the SVP at the time that was a couple levels above me promoted me. He said, Jason, he goes, you're going to be the sales leader, but you're not really going to be the leader. You'll just be the manager. He's like, you'll see. It'll take you it'll take you a little while to learn how to lead properly. For now, you'll just manage the number more than anything. So I was fortunate that I was already the de facto go-to for my peers. So I see a lot of folks who get promoted for the first time and now they're responsible for their peers, and that's a challenge, but I was fortunate that wasn't a challenge for me. But I'll tell you one funny story about first-time leader, and I'm being a first-time leader, and I was that energy. Definitely, no one will ever accuse me of not having energy. And I remember on Sunday nights, I've never gotten the Sunday scaries, but Sunday nights I'd send this recap email. Hey, here's the recap from the prior week. Here's a look at the week ahead. And one Sunday night, I'm sending an email, and I hit send at, I call it 9:50 Eastern on this note. I walk in, this is pre-COVID, walk back into the office. My whole team's there for the Monday morning meeting. And one guy, he looks at me, he goes, Jason, he goes, do you watch Game of Thrones? This is the height of it. I go, no. He goes, well, you sent an email in the last 10 minutes of the series finale of Game of Thrones. And he's like, this guy better have something important to say, or I'm going to kill him. So I was like, you know what? Learned my lesson, and I definitely do not do that anymore. The send it later button or Slack later button is my best friend.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm not like the biggest sports fan. I like sports, but I'm not the biggest. And so there's sometimes I'm like doing work while big sports things on it. I'm like, I maybe shouldn't send this email during the World Series. People probably care more about that than whatever stupid thing I'm emailing them. Yeah, that was funny. So Sprinklr had insane growth over the 10 years you were there, going from like 5 million in revenue to 500 million plus. And the company went public in June 2021. What was IPO day like for you?
That was a day. I mean, you work with leaders over time, and they talk about, oh, we're going to IPO, right? And you just kept sensing it was going to happen, and always wanted to do it. And it's like a dream, right? It's just out there. But I remember we finally filed our S1. We were so excited. And then this was in the middle of COVID, right? So we were really fortunate, and happened to be when we filed the S1 and when it was set to IPO, the New York Stock Exchange lifted their protocol, or they finally let people back on the floor. We were the first IPO post-COVID allowed back on the floor. So went up to New York City and threw a huge party, and it was great. It was on the floor, ringing the bell with Jim Cramer right behind us. But that was a day I will certainly always remember. It's what you join early stage companies for. I would imagine a liquidity event is probably fun in any respect, but the ability to be on the floor of the stock exchange and hear the bell ring and cheer and chant and seeing that all those years later was just freaking awesome.
Yeah, you spend like so much time growing up at a startup, like looking at that iconic image of the stock exchange. You're just like one day, and I can't imagine. I think about that with Lattice. No longer there, but I'm like, Lattice, knock on wood, is going to IPO someday, and it's like I'm just hoping I get invited to like a sub party around the New York Stock Exchange. That's my goal. Yeah,
it was. I felt very fortunate to be part of that.
And like, what was this journey like for you on a personal level? I mean, it must have been crazy trying to go. You went through probably so many iterations of the company, so many different people, and like the company changed so much. Like, how were you able to kind of keep up with this company growth curve and sort of survive for 10 years there?
Yeah. So I think it's a couple of things. Like, one, it was rewarding in every sense, be it personally, professionally, financially. Like, the company was always great to me. I got married, had both my boys while working there. I went through sickness while I was working there. The company was always great to me. It provided me the opportunities to sell to the biggest companies in the world, travel the globe, and then certainly to go through a liquidity event like an IPO helped set me up financially. So I felt really fortunate. I think the biggest thing over that, anyone thinking about having a big run in a company, or do I leave, or like all those things that go through your mind, I think there's a few things. One, I used to say there's two constants. One is speed, the other is change. So that's a definite constant at any high growth company. You've got to have the growth mindset, and just be open to challenges and open to learn. If you're not okay being humbled constantly, get knocked down, pick your ass up, like just go figure it out. I think it's really, really critical. I think the other part is, like, I stayed for a long time, is I remember having lots of colleagues who, they got off the bus early and they were like, oh, I found this opportunity, sounded really interesting. And then it didn't work out after a year or 2 years. And then I'd see a bunch of folks, they're on job 2 or job 3 a couple of years later, and they were trying to constantly recreate the special thing we have with the people and the technology and the timing. It's just so hard to recreate. And I'm unfailingly loyal. So all of those things made for me sticking around for as long as I did.
Yeah. It's like, there's only so many of these special companies out there that are going to grow that fast and change that much. And it's like, when you sort of have that seat on the rocket ship, you better strap yourself in and stay there as long as you can. And I sort of felt like that at Lattice, where it was like, this is my chance, and I didn't last 10 years. I lasted 5 because I want to go start a company, but it was still like really hard decision to leave, because it was like, this feels special. And I know it's like, this isn't going to just happen again at any other company. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, like, do you have advice for other people who want to go join a high growth company, or maybe they're already like, how can they kind of navigate all the change that happens at the company, and not only navigate it, but like thrive in kind of that natural chaos?
Yeah. So it's what I said before. It's like the simplest thing is mindset, right? Just to use that term, like mindset is everything. If you're not comfortable in that environment, it's not for you, and that's okay, but you have to like in that environment, you can't wait around for people to just do things for you. I like the Extreme Ownership book from Jocko. You've read that? Like in small companies, you have to have that mindset of extreme ownership and drive to completion, especially in small companies. So the mindset of learning is a huge one. I always also had opportunities, right? If I felt that when I wasn't learning, me being bored is a dangerous thing. Constantly go seek to challenge yourself, right, within your current role, and just keep looking for the next challenge within the company. If it's something that you want to continue to do and that you can earn, you can go find great opportunity for yourself.
And after Sprinklr, you went and joined People.ai to lead their East Coast sales team. For those that aren't familiar, can you kind of give a quick explanation of People.ai?
Yeah, sure. So People.ai is a revenue intelligence technology that allowed go-to-market teams to win more revenue through improving pipeline execution. So it did things like activity capture. So you'd have a factual understanding of what was taking place in an account or an opportunity or by AE. And then the data can be used by leaders to coach reps in deals or do territory segmentation. And then some folks may be familiar with the name Close Plan, which was part of People.ai. So things like account plans or relationship maps and opportunity scorecards, all of those things ultimately help sales teams sell more.
Gotcha. And what was this transition like for you? I mean, it must have been kind of hard or at least weird. Like after being at the same company for so long, you have to go join this, an already existing startup. Like what was that transition like for you personally?
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing I said before is I'm never without energy, right? So for me, I was so energized to just go build again. I wanted to go build again. And you think you learn a lot over 10 years, but you're never quite sure until you go try and apply, right? So I was super excited about that. And then I think the biggest thing is most things in life come down to expectations, So I knew what I was getting into. And I was ready to go build, and the transition was great. And it was just refreshing to go be at a small, nimble company again and dive right in. And quite frankly, the fact that it was in the sales tech space, to anyone in sales, especially in a leadership capacity, like it's second nature. So like the value prop and the talk track was super easy for me to pick up. And quite frankly, I was on customer calls in the first few days just because it was very natural.
Like how big was the company when you joined? What was the state of the sales team?
Company was about 300 people or so. Sales team company was growing really tremendously. This was just before some of the world fell apart again, so it was definitely interesting. It was company's great.
Yeah. And so you hired 9 AEs in 6 months at People.ai. Like how did you approach your AE hiring, and sort of what do you look for when you're hiring AEs?
So if there's one theme from this conversation, Alex, is probably mindset and curiosity. So I'm a big believer that there's a handful of fundamental things that just cannot be taught. Natural curiosity. Put anyone in the room, and if you have the just internal inertia and desire to go ask smart questions and understand what's being said in the room and go seek for the second and third and fourth, you always have to get at business pain or getting to know somebody or what have you, right? But curiosity goes a long, long way. And then mindset of wanting to learn, trying to figure out how you go solution and to challenge yourself. All those things I think are just intangibles that can't be taught. I think it's those two things you combine, like an IQ with an EQ mix, can't be taught. You can teach experience. I can teach you sales process or meta or what have you, right? But the other things are so critically important. And those are, to me, the two absolute requirements in folks that I talk to.
Are there specific like interview questions or situations you put people through in an interview process to like test for curiosity? Like how do you actually do that?
Yeah. So my favorite question these days is for curiosity, tell me something that you taught yourself in the last 6 months and tell me how you did it. And people always go, personal, professional. I go, I don't know, pick one. And you get some really interesting ones. One person the other day told me they wanted to get better actually at asking questions. So he's like, I started a podcast. It's funny. I was like, tell me more about that. How'd you go do it? Right. So it's really, for me, you also get to know people just to understand what they talk about, but you can start to get an understanding of, is this person like really a naturally curious individual, and how do they go apply that for themselves?
And I guess, why is curiosity so important for sales? Is it just because in qualification, you just have to ask deep questions and keep asking, and then you can kind of put that back on the prospect? Like, why is that the single most important thing?
So it's a good question. So I think that you can teach someone to go ask the right handful of questions in the deal, right? You get on a first call, we're going to do discovery, Mr. Customer, Mr. Prospect. I've got my list of my top 10 discovery questions, fine. The thing is, when the customer gives you that first answer, the ability to not just say, you know what, let me go from number 1 to number 2, let me go dig in on that and go ask the next question, right? And go and ask the next natural question, all in that line, to keep getting at whether it's business pain or why that person cares or what have you, right? But the ability to keep asking questions on that initial one that weren't planned, right? But that's something that is very hard to teach. And that's what's really intriguing about that as a quality for me.
Yeah. And I think it's also really hard to teach like that, like coming across as authentic as you ask those questions. Like,
Yes.
you're genuinely curious about the problem that they're experiencing and how they're dealing with it today, as opposed to like, hey, I'm just reading my questions off of, know, my notes tab. And like, that authenticity just comes across in people's voices and the way that they ask and talk. And yeah, no, it's super interesting. I'm interviewing a bunch of sales reps right now, so this is a very top of mind. Yeah.
Of course.
How did you earn trust with the People.ai team? Because I'm sure, there was already a sales team. You're the new leader being brought in. Like, how did you earn trust, and how would you kind of describe your own leadership style?
Yeah. So I think there's a handful of things, and it's a critical question. So whether I did this at Sprinklr or People.ai or where I am currently, I think there's a handful, 5 key pillars for me. So I talk about myself. My biggest strength is also maybe my biggest weakness, and that's empathy. And I think it goes into number 2, which is everyone's different, right? And act accordingly. So understanding how the team and what they individually care about, where their strengths and weaknesses are, what their situation's like at home or with family or what have you, how to have empathy towards that situation and how to treat and work with and help develop personally and professionally all those folks in a way that makes sense for them, I think is really critical. I think number 3 is trust and accountability. Probably often used quote, trust is hard to earn, easy to lose, so I think it goes both ways, and my goal is to earn trust and allows you then to have a challenging conversation from time to time and hold each other accountable, but I think those conversations only go well when there's mutual trust and respect between the two people having them. 4th is I typically tell the folks that I work with that I'm not going to ask you to do anything I wouldn't do myself. I find that to be disingenuous. And then the 5th is I try my best to be consistent. I try to be a 4 to 6 guy. I definitely have energy. I can get excited. I can get upset, what have you. But almost all the time, we've probably all worked for someone before. Maybe you have, Alex, of like, or work with somebody that you give them good news and they're over the moon, and you give them bad news and it's like someone just killed their cow, and it's like they're just so on either side of it. And it's unsettling, right? It's uncomfortable when that happens. So I really try to be as consistent as possible in my approach. Good news is good. Bad news is okay, fine. Celebrate things, but trying to be consistent in approach. And I think those have always served me as good pillars in how I work with the team.
I'm curious, do you feel like you mold your management or leadership style to the person who you're managing, or are you fairly consistent? Do you treat everyone kind of equally the same, or do you, mirror back like kind of what they're sharing with you? And how do you think about like each person's unique quirks as you work with them?
So I think there needs to be some level of consistency, just because there's not enough time in the day to go like be full-fledged like individual to everybody, but being able to have an individual touch of, hey, I know this person, for instance, like this person is his or her strength is in how they communicate, but they struggle with like deck building, you know what I mean? Or another person, they struggle to ask the tough question of the customer. Another one struggles with this, like, or this one has something's happening at home. Their family member is whatever, right? Like how I work with those individuals and how I my day to day with them and those interactions, I really try and vary and I don't want to say acquiesce, but like I adjust accordingly, but I do try to keep a level of consistency that so that there's clear expectations and accountability on both sides.
And I guess it goes back to your, I think the first leadership principle you mentioned was empathy and sort of meeting people where they're at and understanding what they're going through, right? And then kind of molding your style and how you work with them, accordingly. Switching gears a little bit to like sales process. You wrote a great article about kind of like the messy middle, and the messy middle is where, kind of deals are won and lost. Can you talk a little bit about what is the messy middle? Why is that such a critical stage? And like, how do you recommend people kind of overcome it?
Yeah. So the messy middle happened. I mean, it was quite frankly, the problem that People.ai solved, right? I just thought it was a great way to think about it because, I genuinely think it's where deals are won and lost is the middle. People.ai is great go-to-market tech, and it sits in an undefined space. It's a very crowded space, right? Lots of players in that go-to-market space, and so there's like sales loft and outreach that do some outbound prospecting and high volume sequencing. It's like the first 10% of the sales cycle, and then call the last 10% is like the Clarios and the boost ups of the world. I need to manage my deal to closure and forecast my deal, but there's this middle 80%, this messy middles, I think where the deals are won and lost. For the AE that's developing strategic account plans or relationship maps, or I got to do mid pick or bant or fill my opportunity scorecard, and then like for the leader, it's how do I get an understanding of what's going on in the account and a factual set of data of what's taking place, and like all those things in the middle and how you coach against that, all those things in the middle, that's pipeline execution. That's the middle 80% of the deal. That's where deals are won and lost, that's all pipeline execution. That's the messy middle,
It's interesting. I think this is definitely some of the things we're trying to solve now at Doc because, everyone has their classic opportunity stages and that's how you forecast and get a sense as a leader. Like these are the stages of my deal and where we're at, but so much happens in between those stages, whatever you call it, verbal qualification, whatever. There's so much process that goes there. And so much is like, hidden from a sales rep's, sales leader's view of what's getting sent to the client. How are we collaborating? Have we done security reviews? Have we done legal? How many product evaluations we have? The list goes on and on and on. And there's such a challenge when it comes to both, like, how do you standardize that process for the sales rep, but then also how do you give like the leadership team visibility into like what's actually going on here that's sort of like beyond just like the stages in the CRM. It's an interesting problem that resonates with
to your point. Like some of those things at the end are like paper process and something like, hey, I got to move my deal and I got to get it done on time on the forecast. You can actually go back to the beginning and go, hey, did we actually do the right level of research and did we map the right place in the org to figure out, did we get to power? Or are we more of just with a coach, right? What does that role look like? All of those things really make a big difference at the end, of the cycle. It's what's done in the beginning. That's where I think deals are won and lost.
Do you believe in mutual action plans? Like, do you introduce those in the beginning? Does that help this process at all? Or do you find like buyers don't actually want to use them?
Well, I think that's the key word, right? Is mutual in the mutual action plan. I think sales reps can put them together all day long, but if they're not mutual in nature, it's just your list of to-dos that the customer is not necessarily buying into, So I think that's key is you need your champion bought in, and I think the other element is, especially, I think if you're selling in an IT space, it's one thing, but if you're selling to the line of business, so not IT, especially in a large company, most times the sales rep has more experience in how to procure technology around some of the gotchas, that happen in a large deal cycle than the person in the other line. Now, many times the person in the line doesn't want to admit that they don't know the answer. They don't want to tell you they don't know, or they'll probably just tell you that the answer they think you want to hear, which happens more times than not because of anything malicious. They probably mean well. They just don't know. So thinking about how you position and frame that mutual action plan and think through all of the elements and help guide that is really critical to getting a deal across the line at the deal closure.
Yeah, and I found like the worst mutual action plans are the ones where it's all just like the selfish steps. It's like, let's do legal review, let's do security review, let's close the contract. And that's where it ends. It's like, It's got to be anchored around the customer's problem that you uncovered at the beginning. And like, okay, here's the roadmap of how we're going to solve your problem, not the roadmap of how we're going to close the deal and get my commission. It's like, you got to kind of change the framing of it. And that's when it works best.
Totally.
At People.ai and now at Cresta, where you work, you've had really a front row seat to how AI is impacting go-to-market teams. And before we get into AI, can you tell me a little bit about Cresta and why you decided to join?
Yeah, sure. Cresta is just in a fantastic space. It was an opportunity, quite frankly, I couldn't turn down. So Cresta is contact center AI technology. It's just gets the best results in the industry with the biggest customers, period. It was founded by Sebastian Thrun and two others in the Stanford AI lab a number of years ago. If you know the name Sebastian Thrun, and maybe is leader of Google X, which was focused on their like Google's moonshot projects, like flying cars, things like that. Right? So the contact center is really interesting. People in the contact center are typically low wage, takes them a long time to ramp, and it's a stepping stone job. And like by the time those people are productive and proficient, they're on to the next job, right? So it's a space that's just ripe for disruption. So like Crest has been doing Gen AI for years, well before ChatGPT came into the public view. And so we provide a chat co-pilot called Agent Assist that helps the contact center agents say the right thing at the right time to drive the objective that they're looking for. Then there's a whole host of data for contact center QA folks and leaders and performance and how to optimize data. You know, lots of folks think about the contact center as care, but there's another big use case is sales. So one quick example is like a popular tax software company. They sell their products to consumers. They took Cresta, gave it to 100 agents, and then another like control set didn't have Cresta. In 8 weeks, the agents on Cresta drove 2x sales conversions and 4x revenue simply because the technology is helping them along. So it's really interesting and really, really fascinating.
So interesting. And so somebody's on a phone with a customer, and then the AI is essentially like listening to the conversation and providing recommendations of sort of what to say next. Is that kind of how it works?
It's exactly it. Yeah. And then you take that in a couple different ways. Yes. But in a nutshell, that's exactly it. And it's super powerful.
Yeah. Super interesting. Because I imagine I was actually on the phone with Comcast the other day. And it's like, I imagine like those people you talk to, they just have this like hard coded script of like, say this, then that, customers complaining at this. And then it must be amazing to have AI that can kind of like provide recommendations on the fly based off what the customer is actually saying, as opposed to like this hard coded script that I assume that everyone has.
Totally. Yeah. And then you think about, they always read the compliance statement, and it's like, well, how many people actually do that? But how do they check for that? And how do they there's lots of really interesting things that I think it's a space that is ripe for disruption. Hence my choice.
Yeah, really cool. And like, what's the secret to kind of selling this AI technology? Because as you're talking, it's like, whoa, this sounds amazing. And do you just like blow someone's mind with a demo? Is there an education problem? Like, how do you think about selling kind of such innovative technology to companies?
So I've referenced a few books. I don't read good, but no, I referenced a few books, and I was reading Nate Nasrallah's book the other day called Selling With. It's in my bag. I was on a plane the other day. And he talks a lot about buyer enablement, which I couldn't agree more. And the concept of buyer enablement is how do you go enable your champions to go sell internally, especially if you work at a large company, if you're selling to large enterprises, your champion is really selling tremendously internally, and especially in a new space in AI that has so much confusion and a lot of unknowns to it. How you go enable your buyer, I think, is so critical, and we're spending a lot of time focusing on how we're doing that today.
And what does enabling a buyer actually look like or mean to you? Is it just giving them, co-creating a presentation, giving them videos? Like, do you organize a bunch of assets in one place for them? Like, how do you actually tactically kind of enable a buyer?
Yeah, it's all of those things, but there's a tremendous amount of nuance to it. How you work with your own sort of product marketing, how you go create the right types of content, the right elements. That's really, you have to use the right word, Alex. It's co-creation. That's the real key, is how you go understand the business problem, how you understand all those key elements, and you go build the right elements to deliver alongside your champion.
I'd love to end today's conversation just hearing a little bit from you, because you're so deep in this AI world now. Like, what are the trends you're kind of seeing across the marketplace as respect to AI? And then maybe how it's kind of impacting your own go-to-market efforts. Are you using this technology to close more business yourself? I'd love to kind of hear about it.
So on the last one, I'll take the last one first, actually. So on a personal level, actually, we've done a bunch of sessions with the team, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but thought of using ChatGPT or Google Bard to help with prospecting or research, is really fascinating, really interesting. There's some great things out there to help enable sales reps to prospect better and do better research. But when I'm thinking about AI in the large enterprise, like impacting go-to-market efforts, is a handful of key observations. One, what we're trying to do, or what we can, is attach to some level of Gen AI initiative in a large company. I'd bet you 8 or 9 out of 10 companies, if not 10 out of 10, they have some version of some AI initiative, some Gen AI initiative. And I think it goes into the second point is there's so much confusion and folks just don't know where to start. Nobody quite knows what is what. Everyone says they're AI, but you need to stand out and be clear. And there's this element of, well, do we want to use the public elements like ChatGPTs or a private version of that? Do we want to go use the build a private model, which will take years? Like personally, I think the domain-specific LLMs that are focused on a single line of business and a single handful of use cases that have tremendous firepower, I think it's really interesting. I think that's where it will end, where it will begin actually, and where you're going to see big pickup. The other thing we're really seeing right now is in almost all these deals is we're seeing companies say they have an AI council, so that's a whole, there was always paper process and InfoSec. Now the AI council is part of that process, or we're in existing customers, we're seeing brands come to us and say, hey, I know you already have an MSA, but we need to add this amendment in the MSA for AI, and it's just elongating deal cycles entirely. It's interesting. It's exciting though.
And everyone's just figuring it out. I mean, everyone knows they need to do something about AI, but the landscape is changing so quickly. And it's like, we're even thinking about how do we build AI technology into Doc? And it's like OpenAI is a clear, choice, but then Google Gemini gets released like last week. And it's like, okay, wow, maybe we build into that. And then the costs involved, AI is expensive computing power. So how does that change business models and how we sell and our pricing and packaging? And it's like, everyone knows we need to do something, but how you do it. And because it's changing so fast, like I'm paranoid, I'm going to make the wrong decision, choose the wrong vendor, whatever it is. And then, this new thing comes up, but it's even cooler and better. And so, I don't know, but it's a fun puzzle and it's cool to have like a front seat to like the innovation.
Totally. I think it'll be interesting to see. And I was reading one of those VC predictions for 2024, and certainly AI was a big topic, no surprise. And some of the stated beliefs was like, the hype around Gen AI will give way to a focus on results. I think that'll happen sooner than later. And I think the companies that can separate themselves in the AI space, there will be separation, and it'll be the ones that can show that they can really be additive technology and can show that they can go make money and focus on business results with really tangible use cases will be durable. So certainly making that bet right now myself, and I'm excited about it.
Well, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation, Jason. If people want to check out Cresta, if they want to follow up you and ask with you and ask questions, where's the best place for them to find you?
Ping me on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to connect and chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. That's a wrap on another episode of Grow and Tell. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, or find every episode at growandtellshow.com. I'm your host, Alex Krakov. Thank you for listening.